One's the son of a real estate tycoon, the other of a tea seller. Their personal tastes and lifestyles are, well, radically different. But it's what Donald Trump and Narendra Modi have in common that's got the whole world watching the U.S. president's visit to India. Yes, we can compare their America first and Make in India visions as they haggle over trade and military contracts. But the warm reception in Ahmedabad is much more than the answer to the Howdy Modi rally that Trump hosted in Texas last September. Both rode the wave of identity politics to power. In his speech, Trump made no mention of India's recent citizenship law that critics see as anti-Muslim, or the crackdown that's accompanied the scrapping of Muslim-majority Kashmir's autonomous status. Does the U.S. come out weaker or stronger by staying silent? And what next for India, one-time spearhead of the non-aligned movement, as the U.S. pivots away from traditional ally Pakistan and digs in for a long-term showdown with China? Are Delhi and Washington bound by a new special relationship? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at Trump and Modi's special chemistry, you might say. Joining us is Lila Jacinto, senior editor, France24.com. Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
We want to welcome as well Financial Times Paris Bureau Chief Victor Mallet, the author of River of Life, River of Death, the Gandhis and India's Future.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us. From London, businessman Mahendra Jadeja, advisor to Conservative Friends of India. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
And from Washington, Wall Street Journal columnist Sadanand Dumi, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute think tank. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter. The hashtag is F24debate. Yeah, that rally for the inauguration of what's billed as the world's largest cricket stadium taking place in Narendra Modi's home state of Gujarat, the highlight of a packed day one of Donald Trump's visit. Kathy Kadir-Clifford has more.
Stopping off at the Taj Mahal, the US President and First Lady strolled around the UNESCO World Heritage Site. A few hours earlier, Trump addressed the biggest foreign rally crowd of his political career, pouring out praise for India and its Prime Minister Narendra Modi, to the world's biggest cricket stadium, packed with over 100,000 people, an event dubbed Namaste Trump.
The First Lady and I have just traveled 8,000 miles around the globe to deliver a message to every citizen across this nation. America loves India, America respects India, and America will always be faithful and loyal friends to the Indian people.
Trump also visited the former home of independence leader Gandhi. Between visits, streets lined with crowds and performers greeted the US president's motorcade. Though not all residents were thrilled, those living in this slum say a wall has been built to hide their neighborhood, which authorities deny. Meanwhile, in New Delhi, Communist Party workers protested against the visit.
Modi, the Prime Minister, instead of standing up for our own country's interests, succumbing to the pressures of US administration.
Earlier in the day, as he touched down in Modi's home state, Trump was greeted with a warm hug from the Indian Prime Minister. The president set to spend Tuesday in the capital, where he'll attend gala dinner meetings with Modi over stalled trade talks. Trade tensions have escalated between the two countries since the US administration imposed tariffs on steel and aluminium from India, which responded with higher penalties on US goods.
Yeah, the mention there of those trade tensions, but do they really matter, Victor Mallet?
I don't know. I mean, it's certainly sort of cast a bit of a damper over the whole trip. That America has withdrawn some trade privileges for India, and they have been talking about doing big trade deals, but it's all been put on the back burner for now because of the various disputes that they have. But they're obviously trying to be chummy with each other. They're quite similar characters in a way. Both sort of, as I think your reporter said, very nationalistic, both quite anti-Muslim in some of their attitudes. They're both quite bombastic. They like to sort of boast about their performance politically and in other ways. So there is a kind of meeting of minds in a way. But on the other hand, any Indian prime minister has to be friends with what is still the world's most important superpower in military terms, and that's the US. He had a very charming relationship with Obama after Modi first took power in 2014. He had good relations with Obama, and they talked about completely different issues.
Jacinto?
Well, I would say really the big takeaways is not really the deliverables in terms of the big trade deal that everyone was expecting. A caveat, I mean, there also is a tendency to play down expectations, but there is no doubt that there are tough negotiations. But I would say the really what this trip is all about is really about each of these two leaders' domestic political agendas. This is very much a trip where the optics and the style overrides the substance. Donald Trump is heading in for re-election. This is a man who, his priorities are business, money, and a re-election. Modi has, this is very much a display. Modi coming out of a relatively tough period, even though, he's very popular. He had a landslide victory last year. But he's facing protests which are unprecedented about his Citizenship Amendment Act and his national registration measures. The economy is in a slump. So this is very much Modi showing to his domestic base that, look, I have the president of the U.S. As my good friend, and I can put out this show for you.
Yeah, India rolling out the red carpet, lining the route from the airport to the stadium with banners, posters, and even we can show you a larger-than-life cutout likeness of the two leaders, which you can see. Well, that's not it, but we'll perhaps show it a little bit later on. A cutout likeness where you see Modi and Trump on par, one with the other, where Modi, in fact, is slightly taller than Trump.
Well, I don't know. Put it down to fake news. These are two men who are very well versed in promoting themselves, and the truth can take a backseat. But yes, there we are. Modi.
In real life, Modi is definitely not taller than Trump. I think we can be sure.
All right. Yeah. Mahendra Jadhav, why did Donald Trump, as he said in that report, travel those 8,000 miles to India?
Well, let me tell you one thing. I born and brought up and educated in Gujarat, and I had an opportunity for a couple of occasions to meet Narendra Modi. And as you know, that Gujarat is a very, very entrepreneur, the state out of the many states long before that. And I think there is always the synergy between the two great democratic the countries in the world. And I think the both has got a vision, and the vision are you will see probably they already announced the 3 billion the sign for the military, and whatever they probably will sign, it probably come out tomorrow. But I think is as you know, perhaps the highest number of the Indian diaspora lives in America, and Indians are very proud being in UK. I mean India as well. And what they are just trying to do that they're showing that look, we can do together. If the two democratic the party are doing very well and countries are doing very well, why not together? I just somebody just mentioned that Modi and both of them are anti-Muslim, and I'm not, agree with you. They are not anti-Muslim. They're very, very ISIS people. Rather than, you should not do that, because I know that many my own friends within the government of the BJP and many leaders are also, they come from the Muslim community. So I think we should refrain from the word using that they're anti-Muslim. They're not anti-Muslim, because we live in the country whereby we always work shoulder to shoulder.
Sadanand Dume, we saw ahead of Trump's arrival in the capital, Delhi, one policeman killed. There were pro and anti demonstrations, again, surrounding this citizenship bill that was recently passed. Your view on the current climate in India as Donald Trump touches down?
Sorry,
that's a very good question. But before I get to that, let me just sort of let me quickly talk about one sort of major point which I think your other panelists have not touched upon. What is driving this visit more than anything else, more than domestic politics, more than the fact that the US and India are democracies, is one very simple fact, and it's a shared geopolitical interest. I'll give you one very quick statistic. Between 1947 and 1999, only 3 US presidents visited India. Since 2000, every single sitting president has made a trip to India. And there's a one-word answer to that question, and that answer is China. And what you're seeing over here is no matter who is in power in Washington and no matter who is in power in Delhi, these two countries are trying to get together because they feel that they have a shared interest in checking China's rise as a hegemon. Now, quickly to your point about the mood in India, this does come at a very fraught moment in Indian domestic politics. There have been protests across the country about a citizenship law which critics say discriminates against India's Muslim minority and dilutes India's secularism by introducing a religious test for the first time for fast-tracking citizenship claims for refugees. So this has been a fraught issue, a live issue, and as you pointed out, it has erupted into violence tonight while the US president is on Indian soil, which is, of course, embarrassing for the Modi government.
Yeah, Trump and Modi paying a visit earlier when they were in Gujarat to the home from where Mahatma Gandhi launched civil disobedience marches against British colonial rule in the 1930s. Sabarmati Ashram, it's in the suburbs of Ahmedabad. It's where Barack Obama visited 5 years ago. At the time, Trump's predecessor wrote in the guest book, quote, "He is a hero not just to India, but to the world." No mention of Gandhi by Trump this time. He basically just penned, "To my great friend, Prime Minister Modi, thank you for this wonderful visit." There you have what Donald Trump wrote. Saradan Dume, your thoughts on...
Francois, one small correction.
Go ahead.
The Barack Obama did not visit the same place. He visited Gandhi's grave in Delhi, where he wrote those words. So just one small thing. But your larger point is absolutely spot on. That Barack Obama really was looking at India through the lens of the nonviolent independence struggle, Gandhi's own influence on Martin Luther King, and all that those values stood for. And what we've seen, particularly in the last few years, is an erosion of those values, not just in India itself, where increasingly there are protests by many people who feel that minority rights, but in particular Muslim rights, have come under siege as Mr. Modi has promoted some extremely hardline figures within his Hindu nationalist movement, but also, of course, in the United States, where Trump represents a kind of a kind of nationalism that is not terribly concerned with the kinds of things that Obama was concerned with. So you have this sort of shift taking place in both countries, and I think in some ways the contrasting messages about Gandhi does capture that.
All right, Victor Mallet, does it matter if the U.S. president doesn't bring up human rights?
I think it does, yeah, because there's all this talk about the world's two greatest democracies and so on, and I think most liberals and Democrats around the world would be concerned that both the Indian democracy and America's democracy are being threatened. The institutions that make those democracies what they are under threat from essentially very nationalistic governments and the policies they do. I mean, I think it's worth remembering that Mahatma Gandhi, who's been much talked about, was murdered by an RSS Hindu fanatic, and the RSS was subsequently banned. And the RSS, if you like, was the parent of the BJP, which is Narendra Modi's party, and he indeed was an RSS militant. I'm not saying that he would have murdered Gandhi, but the point is that the tradition of the party is very much Hindu nationalist, and it is very much against the secular India that Mahatma Gandhi helped to found.
Mahendra Jadeda, your thoughts on this? Is the way forward for India to be a Hindu state?
Well, I tell you, because I'm not very much qualified for the certain the subject is being raised during this program there. But don't forget that the India is always been the majority people are they're living in a Hindu there, and still they work with without any problem whatsoever with the Muslim and with Muslim Jews and other minorities. I don't know I think the whole program, you understand that you look in India and America working together for the safety of the world. We are all concerned about it. When there is a minority, certain incident take place time to time. When there is a big continental that comes into the independency, and I think we should take the positive out of the visit rather than we talk about the negative side of it. Why can't we talk about it? Does this the two leaders put together, will they bring the safety of the world or not? Why don't we talk about that one rather than we talk about this Modi and the Trump are just completely different kind of people there, and that I wanted to know from you, I suppose.
Leila Jacinto, are we emphasizing the negative too much?
No, not at all. There is, India's track record, the Modi administration's track record on Muslims is by now well known. It's an open secret, and the thing is, I do agree that if the U.S. does not bring this up, it really lessens the U.S. stature. Muslims in India will have a completely different story. There's been a rise in cow vigilante violence. There have been crackdowns on Muslim universities. There is no doubt that there is a very strong anti-Muslim agenda. For Trump not to mention this is a weakness. And in many respects, there were some of the places that Trump went to today, there was a sense of incongruity. There was almost cognitive dissonance. There's Trump going to Sabarmati Ashram. Sabarmati Ashram is an extremely sacred place for Gandhians. His assassins, as Victor pointed out, was a member of the RSS, which is the parent group of the BJP. Then he makes a visit to the Taj Mahal, which is called, the jewel of Muslim architecture in India. There have been many hardline Hindu leaders in Narendra Modi's movement who do not see the Taj Mahal as a Muslim piece of architecture. There are all sorts of absurd claims that there was a Hindu temple there before, etc. So, on display is a sense of cognitive dissonance between what is the reality and what is the picture that they're trying to show.
Is it cognitive dissonance, or is the U.S. strategy more measured? We'll put it to our panel when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate. Back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. Donald Trump making his first visit as president to India. This after welcoming Narendra Modi in Texas last September. We're talking about it with France24.com's Leila Jacinto. We're also with Victor Mallet, Paris bureau chief of the Financial Times, and in a previous life based in Delhi. Hence the author of River of Life, River of Death, the Ganges, and India's future, which looks at the
environmental issues in India, which are very, very difficult.
Challenges.
Which Modi has tried to fix, and he hasn't been, unfortunately, any more successful than previous Indian prime ministers, but it's a huge issue in India.
All right, we're also pleased to welcome back from London Mahendra Jadeja, who is advisor to Conservative Friends of India, and from Washington, D.C., Wall Street Journal columnist Sadanand Dume, resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute think tank. Just before the break, Leila Jacinto mentioning what she saw as a disconnect between Donald Trump's embrace of Narendra Modi and the places that he visited while in Gujarat this Monday. Now, in that speech he made at the cricket stadium, no mention of India's scrapping of home rule in Jammu and Kashmir. However, and he did, in his prepared remarks, include a shout-out to a Pakistan that, until recent times, was much closer to Washington than Delhi.
My administration is working in a very positive way with Pakistan to crack down on the terrorist organizations and militants that operate on the Pakistani border. Our relationship with Pakistan is a very good one. Thanks to these efforts, we are beginning to see signs of big progress with Pakistan, and we are hopeful for reduced tensions, greater stability, and the future of harmony for all of the nations of South Asia. India has an important leadership role to play in shaping a better future as you take on greater responsibility for solving problems and promoting peace throughout this incredible region.
Sadnan Dubey, there he's reading from the prepared text. Your reaction to what we just listened to?
So, there are a couple of things going on over here. The first is that, as you correctly pointed out, that if you look at the trajectory of the U.S. relationship with India and with Pakistan, the U.S. has, over the past 2 decades, this is not particularly recent, over the past 2 decades, it has been becoming closer and closer to India, and the relationship with Pakistan has been narrowing. But it is also true that President Trump is seeking to withdraw the U.S. troops, or at least dramatically lessen the American presence in Afghanistan. And he feels, rightly, that he needs a modicum of cooperation from Pakistan for that. So he doesn't want to completely alienate Pakistan. He is not going to Pakistan on this visit. It's a standalone visit to India. So he didn't want to. So, I think the Indians got something because he did mention very clearly that there are terrorist groups operating out of Pakistan. But the Pakistanis also got something because he talked about how it was a good relationship and he wasn't sort of entirely derogatory or negative towards Pakistan in his comments.
And there'll be a press conference on Tuesday. He has in the past suggested that the United States could act as mediator when it comes to Kashmir. Do you think we might hear that again from him?
I doubt it very much. And if he does say that, he would have been very poorly briefed, or he would have decided to ignore his briefers. Because it's sort of, I can't imagine that he's going to want to touch that nerve while he is on Indian soil. Coming back to your point about not raising CAA and Kashmir in his speech in Gujarat, I was not surprised by that. I think he will raise those issues privately. That's what we have been given to understand in Washington. But it doesn't really make sense for him to sort of raise these issues in what is not just a sort of attempt to charm Modi, but also in a way an attempt to charm the Indian people on behalf of the United States. So I was not surprised that he didn't bring up some of those contentious issues in his speech.
All right, so there we heard Donald Trump calling on India to step up on the world stage. Narendra Modi, who broached, without mentioning Pakistan, the issue of Washington's pendulum swing towards Delhi.
In my opinion, India and the U.S. are natural partners, not only in just the Indo-Pacific region. We also contribute an important role to the peace, progress, and security across the globe.
Leela Jacinto?
Well, I mean, a lot of this is just not new. I mean, the geography of the place does not change. The fact that India is a bulwark against the rising power of China, yes, that has been a constant for India-US relationships since independence in 1947. Nehru and Eisenhower had a very good relationship based on that understanding. Yes, India, the relationship got tense during the Kissinger years and the height of the Cold War. But, Washington has been despairing of Pakistan's track record on Islamist jihadist groups for a while. And as Sadanand says, since 2002, Clinton, Obama, they have all been coming to India for visits. But the fact is that the U.S. absolutely needs to manage the Indo-Pakistan relationship, which they knew from the start after the 9/11 attacks. This is the sort of intractable conflict that Washington insiders just roll their eyes because it's so hard to get the Indians and the Pakistanis to work on this issue, which ultimately is a matter of real stability and security in the region.
Victor Mallon?
Yeah, I mean, it looked as though Modi was going to do that. When he was first inaugurated, he invited Sharif, I think, to come to
Nawaz Sharif, the Pakistani
exactly.
Prime Minister.
And there was a kind of move in that direction. But I think not much progress has been made. And I do think that what Sadanand said earlier is really the big point, I think, which is that the geopolitical changes have been going on for many years, as you said, Leela, but the rise of China is really the big difference in the region now. In the last 10, 20 years, that's what's changed the whole viewpoint of the Americans, which is why they're talking now about this. Instead of talking about the Pacific or Asia, they talk about the Indo-Pacific region. This is very much a kind of sop to India saying, be our friend, against China or to help contain China. Of course, they don't put it in those direct terms, but that's what it's about. And India's in the kind of awkward position where it is a geopolitical rival of China, but it also has since independence has very fiercely guarded that autonomy, trying to be non-aligned, and it doesn't want to totally alienate China, nor does it want to alienate Russia. We're still buying a lot of its weapons from Russia and France as well as from the US. So, it's a delicate balancing act, but the rise of China is definitely the big new factor in all.
Right, but also when it comes to, containing China, by alienating and making Pakistan feel vulnerable, is going to throw Islamabad even closer into Beijing's ambit. So, the India-Pakistan problem really needs to be sorted first.
Although it is very complicated because, of course, there's nothing that the Chinese hate more than kind of separatist Muslim extremist groups who are often harbored in Pakistan. So it's a very complex relationship. Yeah.
A very complex relationship all around. We have on Tuesday, one of the big items on the agenda will be military hardware. Donald Trump suggesting that he and Modi will be sealing the deal on a $2.6 billion contract for U.S. anti-submarine Seahawk naval helicopters. Are they going to, Sadanand Dume, dress this up as the big success of Tuesday and therefore perhaps downplay those differences we talked about at the outset on trade?
Well, I'm not sure I'd call it dressing up. I think it is a big success. If you look at the sort of, U.S.-India relationship traditionally as having three legs, the first one being defense and strategic, the second one being economic and investment, and the third one being democracy and values, I think it's fair to say that both the economic leg and the values leg have been weakened over the last few years. But that strategic defense part of the relationship, in fact, has been strengthened. Military sales is just one part of it. India has gone from having essentially a zero, military equipment from the U.S. to purchasing many billions of dollars worth of U.S. equipment. But they've also done other things. So, for example, India has signed 2 of the 3 so-called foundational agreements, which allows the Indian military and the U.S. military to cooperate much more closely. India has moved up the so-called Quad, which involves the US, Japan, Australia, and India. It has moved up cooperation at the Quad up to the foreign minister level. It has made statements about the South China Sea and freedom of navigation that are very, very close to what the US is saying. And above all, it has embraced this whole idea, what Victor talked about, this idea of the Indo-Pacific as a construct, which is very much, without mentioning China, is a construct that places the Chinese threat right at the center. And what we've seen in Washington over the last 3 years is it's not as though people were not concerned about China earlier. But now in Washington, we have a clarity and we have a consensus on China. And that clarity and that consensus on China is what is driving, from the US perspective, the importance of India.
Mahendra Jadeja, the days of India championing the non-aligned movement, that's well and truly over now. Because of China, it has to tie its fate in with that of the United States?
Well, actually, unfortunately, the situation happens currently, and 2,500 Chinese, lost the bodies in one of the coronavirus, and now people are just worried about it. They look, how do we do the business? Because many countries, even the United Kingdom, they have the 40% of the one of the top the company which is they rely upon the Chinese the parts there, and we are stuck there now. And let me tell you one more thing that while I was talking to someone else in Gujarat, where I come from there, and their demand is not only the very the corporate level there, but the SME sector. They have got the opportunity to work with the the America and they're requesting now embassy consulate to open it in Gujarat as well, as a high percent of the Gujarati diaspora lives in America, hotel associations and IT structures and so forth. So just not only to concentrate only on what you call a military, the deal, but the people are more concerned about it. They look, how do we do SME sector? How do we actually improve the SME sector from the India and Gujarat with America as well? So in a reality world, I know that Gujarat has always been an entrepreneur, the state there. They always love to do the business, and you will see the most part of the world. You will see the Gujarati there, and Gujarati is there. And why is Gujarati? They chose it. I'm so glad to say that, because my ancestor also comes from that sort of the cricket background, and I know how good it is that they have it the Trump in the Gujarat in the stadium, whereby one of the biggest stadium it's not inaugurated yet, but this is the situation whereby we wanted to develop the business with America, and that's the non-violence way, rather than be talking about the violence, and
Right.
Gandhiji is always suggested.
All right. So for many Indians, the point made there by Mahendra Jadeja is what they're interested in is being able to trade.
The economy, yeah.
And to be able to trade with the diaspora that's in the United States. Is the current business climate favorable for that?
I think that's a really interesting point about the economy. As Mr. Jadeja said, Modi's pitch as a Gujarati was, I can make this country work, I can make this country rich. Gujaratis are successful business people, we've been a trading people, and we can sort of transfer this expertise and this success to the whole of India. And unfortunately, the economic record is not that great in terms of reviving the economy. And I think a lot of business people in India who supported Modi initially, they were sort of willing to overlook what they felt were his political faults, his slightly divisive approach to Indian politics, because they thought he could get over the economic sclerosis of decades of Congress party rule. And the record shows that actually the economy is now slowing rather dramatically. And
Yet he wins re-election by a landslide.
Yes, and some people would say that was leveraged, or that was achieved by very much ignoring the economy and focusing on very divisive political issues that brought in the Hindu vote. And that is, I think, a problem. With Trump, on the other hand, you see a situation where the economy is doing rather well. And if he gets re-elected, if Trump gets re-elected, one reason for that might be that his domestic economy is doing pretty well, regardless of his, the political disputes that go on around the United States and around the world.
So, Sadhnan Dume, here you have Donald Trump in India. There are tensions because each one is nationalist when it comes to the economy. Just as well, there are tensions between the United States and, say, countries like Turkey. And yet, at the end of the day, they seem to speak the same language, the U.S. president and these strong nationalist leaders like Narendra Modi.
My view on this is that the similarities between Modi and Trump, are a little bit overdone. I think there are many striking differences also. They have very different backgrounds. They have very different economic philosophies. In the end, Trump has been, at least on the economic side, he has cut taxes dramatically, simplified regulations. He's sort of followed a lot of the business playbook, apart from the trade angle, in terms of his sort of domestic policies. Whereas, Modi, as Victor correctly pointed out, has really not proven to be the economic reformer that many people had hoped for. I think in the end, and just one thing though, I think he was elected because he's able to deliver things to many people at a very low level of income. Things like free toilets, free cooking gas cylinders. So he's just been a much more, classic populist in a left-wing tradition on the economic side, while also carrying this sort of, cultural Hindu nationalist agenda at the same time. And I think that's been the secret of his success.
Now, though, would you say that it's kind of changing? Leela Jacinto mentioning in part one of our conversation, there was the recent campaign in New Delhi in state elections where we saw that the BJP really ratcheted up the rhetoric when it came to identity politics. Is that the way it's going to go both in the U.S. and in India for the foreseeable future?
I think the lesson is that when Modi is on the ticket, he still remains an extremely popular figure, and it's hard for the opposition, which is scattered and divided, to defeat him. But when Modi is not on the ticket, when it's a state election, not just in Delhi, but we've seen several other elections, the BJP then has to explain to voters what it has done for them, and it hasn't been as successful. So Modi remains this very powerful politician, very popular politician, but the BJP without Modi is a much less formidable force. On the US side, I'll quickly say that Trump looks like he's in a pretty strong position. The economy is doing well, and the Democrats seem to be imploding.
A new poll puts Trump's popularity numbers at their highest level since March of 2017, Leela Jacinto. You said at the beginning of our conversation that his visit to India was about domestic politics. How so?
Well, I mean, Trump is getting out of the impeachment case. There's a Democratic primary going on right now. He does not really like to travel, to make foreign visits, but he loves crowds, and that's one thing that India can deliver. And
there's a big Gujarati diaspora, isn't there, in America?
Exactly.
A lot of them are Modi supporters.
Oh yes, and I would say one of the things that makes I feel like every visiting U.S. president that comes to India, we seem to talk about, the optics, how important this relationship or something.
We do the same with the French.
Yes, of course, with Rafale deals and arms sales. But I think what is interesting about this visit is it also is a sort of a display of the power of what has been called the diaspora diplomacy. The Indian community in the U.S. is about 4 million. They are not at all a homogeneous group, and in fact, the Indian community tends to vote left. But Modi has a very vocal brand of supporters who have really supported him. And if you think about what happened in Gujarat in 2002, where he actually had a US ban, a visa ban, he's had supporters in the Gujarati community, but not just the Gujarati community, who have actively supported him. And this is almost like a sort of a triumphant visualization of this is what you get. We now have the U.S. president on home soil. Back in the day, I remember Indians leaving for the U.S. It was a sort of a shameful thing. It was a brain drain. These people were not contributing to the development of India. But now the BJP has managed to use the power of the diaspora, and they use it, lobbying in U.S. Congress, keeping a track of all the criticism that's happening abroad of Modi's policy. So you're really seeing the power of the diaspora, which is something new and which Modi and his team have managed to tap into.
Yeah, and there's that sort of political magnetism. Modi and Trump, didn't they have that big gathering in Houston, Texas?
Howdy Modi.
Howdy Modi. And then...
And now it's Namaste Trump.
And I think it was 2015 when Modi went to London, and David Cameron, who was then the British Prime Minister, couldn't believe his luck. The whole of Wembley Stadium was full of people. And he was able to sort of... normally a British Prime Minister would be lucky to get a sort of small, a medium-sized room of people. He's not going to get the whole of Wembley Stadium listening to him talking politics in front of a foreign leader.
They were there. They may not have been listening.
Yeah, well, but the point was, it's that sort of sense of image and power and sort of popularity. It is populism, but it's populism that's successful politically.
Well, I was a party to the witness the Wembley Stadium there, and it's great to see that. Look, this is the beginning of the how diaspora can do. As you know, that in the United Kingdom, which is I can say more about. We have something like 1.8 million. Actually, the Indian diaspora lives there. Out of there is 850,000 are Gujarati. 450,000 are Punjabi, and the rest of them there, and all the way, because what I can say that people do listen there, because we know that is to do the business, which is I know that this weekend I'm also off to Delhi, only for the, the Global Business Summit there. Why do I go there if I don't have the joy with it? What I want to do, I love India. I'm out of India, but India is not out of me, and that's what I look
All
at
right,
it. Regardless,
That'll be our final word. Mahendra Jadeja, I want to thank you so much for joining us from London. I want to thank Saranand Dume for being with us from Washington, D.C., Victor Mallet, Leela Jacinto. Stay with us. Media Watch is next.